Hi, I'm Hunter. I guess I go to school at NYU right now. I'm mostly interested in like film theory, art theory, philosophy, and we're doing Yume Nikki today, which I'm really excited about. Also, just like a brief signpost, I guess, before we start. So, viewing this as Game of the Month Club, and then everybody here really interested in this game, but also possibilities that kind of stem from this game, and kind of like as a group, just kind of adding things so like I don't know the things that you guys know and vice versa, so like a contribution I think would be really cool and fruitful for all of us as a group, which is nice. And then yeah, so just a brief overview of Yume Nikki. I'm gonna play a few minutes of a speed run. Oh, I guess I forgot to transfer that one over. So I'm gonna play a few minutes of a speed run and then just give some brief context for those that haven't played it. So Yume Nikki is basically spatial exploration. It's described on the website of the creator as it is a game that roams or this is translated from Japanese, by the way, but it is a game that roams around the world in a very dark, dreamy setting. Especially, there is no story or purpose. It is just a walking game. So that's that. We'll like skip around a little bit. Here's a place. They're moving really quickly, by the way, with that wind cheat. Yeah, again, speed run, but there's like this area. Interact with characters. Nobody really says anything. There's one instant where somebody does say something, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, but it's very, it functions as a place with things in it that you're inhabiting, not necessarily. Oh yeah, there's this, which is kind of fun. Here's another area. Where's some other things? This one's hell. So you get here a few different ways, but just trying to like give you guys a general like vibe of what's going on. So moving up, down, left or right. There's buttons you can press, 1, 2, and 3 that sometimes have an effect, sometimes don't. And then you can change effects on or off, and there's 24 of those, and then you collect those to get to the end of the game. There's characters you interact with, kind of, you can, press a button on them, and then things will happen, but and sometimes they make noises, but you're never actually, they function more as things you interact with rather than persons, if that makes sense. Yeah, so here's another world. Oh yeah. Yeah, NES world is kind of fun. I'll give you guys one more. This is Numbers World, which is one of the first worlds you're in. It's really ominous, and then a few things happen here as far as like going to other worlds. And then here is the entrance, or not the entrance, the Nexus, where you kind of enter everywhere else. Also, just a note, I have links to all the locations and all the events in other videos and like characters and effects. So if there's anything specific any of you guys want to bring up, let me know, and then I can find it as far as so we all have like immediate visual access to that. Okay, so just at a very foundational level, right? How sound and image acts in Yume Nikki, and then just video games in general. But I think it's really important to mention, especially with Yume Nikki as a game so embedded in function as place, and a game where landscape really takes a large part. Where, and I think it's really helpful to look at it in terms of like film. So. In film, if you look at it, film is a collection of photographs, right? As far as like there's frames, right? Like frames per second. So it's like one frame, one frame, one frame. And video games, not inherently, but can be looked at the same way as far as like, frames per second, but also like there's every time that something happens, it's a recreation of the same place, right? But just like, one frame to the up, or one frame to the up, one frame to the left or right, or, so on and so forth. And looking at it that way, film as a collection of instants, and then also there's a quote by a person that I'm not going to remember, but it's like life is the infinite cinema or something to that extent, meaning that every second, or something smaller than a second, but as far as we can only really think of things in larger terms, as far as like light years and things of that sort. Every second is an instant, is a photograph, and then things happening in larger contexts are collections of those photographs, right? So this game, like if I play this for 10 seconds, that's a 10-second film. And then, a collection of photographs and instants, things of that sort. So why is that important? Looking at video games as a collection of instants and as a collection, there's this thing called Brackage's theorem, where it's every frame in a film, every frame in that film, by being next to another frame, inherently creates narrative context, which means that so if I play 2 seconds of Yume Nikki, right, these 2 seconds, there's a narrative there, as far as, okay, so I just moved from here to here, right? So movement and spatial recognition, so I was there and now I'm here, right? There is some sort of movement there as far as you're accessing it on a line. And, that's really interesting in film, especially thinking in terms of, generally speaking, most mainstream cinema is involved with narrative films. But if you start looking in like some weirder stuff, there's, kind of looking at film differently. Not inherently narrative as far as like a collection of objects or what have you, but also really interesting in Yume Nikki because Yume Nikki is very much so not a conventional game in terms of it deviates a lot from Yume Nikki is very different than like Call of Duty or like Faster Than Light or things in that ballpark. And as far as looking at it in terms of instance, right? Especially, in this world, the lamp world, one of the first areas you can get from the Nexus, there is no background. There's puddles, which show a reflection of a background, and actually, if I remember correctly, it uses the same image as when you spawn the background of the area outside of your bedroom. But, there's black, right? With a few items scattered around. I actually thought it would be helpful. Yeah, here's the full map of Candle World, right? I don't know if I can make it any bigger. So it's just black, and then there's puddles and there's candles. And why is that important? So there's subject and background, right? And then you are playing as the main character, and you are interacting with this background, but background creates context, right? So like if I show you like a video game about cowboys, and then there's certain like cues in the background that lets you know like where you are and what you're doing, right? So like if I show you again like a movie or a video game about cowboys, it's like, oh, okay, there's certain cues here. Or a video game about like space, right? Like where you're at. Yume Nikki, there's nothing, it's black. Which is really, really interesting as far as spatial creation and context. But so what you're left to rely on is using time as a tool to kind of link, like, I was here, now I'm here, right? And you have your starting point, which is the bedroom. So you have, again, like Brackage's theorem, so moving from place to place and your bedroom. So you start here, you go to bed, you wake up. That's all you have to go off of, as far as like, okay, like I know I'm here. That's all the information you're given to create context. And then everything else is kind of, your imagination, right? Like, in things with narrative, like, oh, okay, like there's characters I can latch onto, these are places, here's information that I had prior to this game that informs me on what's going on. And Yume Nikki, there's nothing really, which is really exciting. But the black background doesn't stay in everything. You have places like Pink World, stuff like this. And then, even though this is black, there's like trees that inform where you're going. So it's like, oh, okay, like I'm in a forest of sorts, right? But black background with no inherent information is a really common theme in this game. And then if not black, things that are unintelligible, or not unintelligible, unreadable and hard to understand. Like if you go here, right? There's nothing you can really link to this. Like there's nothing like, oh, okay, like I've seen this before, right? As far as like, oh, maybe I'm in space, or maybe I'm in California, or maybe I'm in New York, right? It's like, what the hell's going on here? Like, I don't know. And that's really exciting, and also creates this really hard to find and hard to make feeling of nonsense, in a sense of you don't know what's happening. And not even that you don't know what's happening, but you have no clue what's going on. Like, you have no context. So that's image, subject, and background. Starting in the bedroom. And then again, functioning as a place, as far as, again, Yume Nikki is described by its creator. It is a game that roams around the world in a very dark, dreamy setting, especially there is no story or purpose. It is just a walking game. So, again, just looking at variables in that sentence, right? It's a world, there is no story, there is no purpose, it is just a walking game. It gives you a world without any story, any purpose, and some things in that world, and that's it. It doesn't specify. I mean, there is an ending, kind of, but it's basically, rather than giving you, like Call of Duty, there's a beginning and an end. There's a story mode. There's multiplayer games with points, and then you finish it, right? Spelunky, which is like one of my favorite games ever, there is an end, right? And then there's kind of an end here, but the biggest thing that this place gives you is a space that you can inhabit, that you can walk around in, which is really, really cool. Before I go on, do you guys have any, immediate thoughts about like images in this game, and like how that affects you as far as like place, as far as the general vibe of the game?
Don't you think that this actually might be an allegory or a metaphor to, I don't know, let's say a very shy girl's perspective into the world? Because I do go to an illustration school, and I do find certain girls or regular students who are kind of shut into their own world. They don't really talk to people. They're kind of socially withdrawn.
Yeah.
But this actually might be a representation of the said people who are kind of closed off to the world, of the outside world.
Okay.
It might seem like this foreign, alien, confusing, rather black place.
Okay. That's a good point. I would say that's also the most accepted reading of the game, as far as like a lot of people spend a lot of time theorizing like about this game, and like specific characters in this game, and what does that mean as a whole. As far as, not suggesting that it's true or not true, but I think at a very base level, this game is a place. And you're inhabiting that character, and definitely you can see traces of the creator of this game, which we'll get to in a few seconds. But and I think that you could definitely, even if you, like, for example, right, like I could draw, give me like 30 seconds and 3 marker colors, and I'll do something on a piece of paper, right? Even if there's nothing inherently narrative there, you could probably create something inherent based on me as a person, and like things that I like, things that I don't like my experiences, my history. I think that you can definitely make assumptions about the developer, which again we'll get to in a little bit, based on things happening in this game, and like variables and what's included, but also what's excluded, as far as like, you know, lonely girl type of thing. But yeah.
Okay, so I feel like there are a lot of clear signifiers that this game is based on, like in Japanese culture, especially in the mid to early 2000s. There's that kind of phenomenon. I always mess up the pronunciation on this show. I think it's hikikomori, which means like shut-in.
Yeah.
So if you notice when you're awake in the game, and so there are several things you can do, right? You can exit and look at your balcony, or you can try to leave, which is through the door. And what happens when you try to leave the door? The character just shakes their head, which is some of the only like character animation that they have other than like walking. So I feel like it's super intentional that this game is about like an isolationism.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they can play the video game inside their house. That's like they can play the video game inside their house. They can read. They can look at the balcony, which is and then they can sleep.
Yeah.
And most of the game is just sleeping.
Yeah.
So I would say it's hard to have an interpretation about the game that isn't about that.
Yeah.
Especially in context with the author, which no one really knows anything about.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads to knowing that they're probably in the same situation. Right?
I agree. Just to clarify, like I'm not disputing that interpretation of the game. I'm just suggesting that at a very base level, you know, there is no narrative. It functions as a place, but what happens in that place as far as the context of that place, even though, you know, there's barely any context to go off of, which I'm going to get to really quickly as far as the developer, I would say that both of those things are true, but there is no... I guess I agree. Yeah.
Well, it's also interesting saying that the developer said that there's no story, and that a lot of people say like, oh, there's no story, right? But I feel like that's not taking the game from like a ludic perspective, where basically what you do is the story of the game.
Yeah.
It's interesting because maybe the ending isn't satisfying, but from that point on, you can't can't do anything else. And it's like a definitive end, and if you look at it, you know, from a ludic perspective, there is definitely a beginning, like, you know, you go to sleep, you're in a dream world, and then you know, then the end happens.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you know, kind of in terms of story, how I was approaching this game is, again, it gives you a place, and you're inhabiting that place, and there's variables in that place, right? As far as, also, just to clearly define what I mean by place, I mean a space that you are occupying, not necessarily physical, as far as the actual like places in this game versus like I have a list over here. I guess what I'm saying is place is different than location, right? Place is kind of inhabiting like vibe and I guess I'm using place in terms of vibe, right? And kind of what this game evokes. But as far as like locations that you're inhabiting, in what the creator gives you, and also the variables in those locations as far as like characters and items and things of that sort, it's not created with a linear story, but it is a story that is created by the person playing with the possibilities in the game that is allowed by the game. Blake mentioned this prior. Nobody knows anything about the developer. We know that they have an email that you can send things to, and sometimes they reply. This game was published and updated a little bit between 2004 and 2007. The last update to the website of this game was on 2008. Actually, I can bring that up really quick. But other than that, oh gosh. Well, so 3.nn.s.nhgp. This maybe? Oh. No, not that. Okay. Maybe if it's cool, I can I have it over here. It's a really minimal website. It's not super important for context, but just kind of nice to look at. And there's a log of changes, right? Most of the things there are just kind of small things as far as bug fixes. One of the things that I thought was maybe worth pointing out is there's a lot of mentions of fine tuning. So fine tuning new menu, fine tuning color, fine tuning effects. So we know that the author of the game is particular, I suppose, as far as again, this game was made in RPG Maker 2003, and a lot of the things that happen in this game aren't particularly hard to accomplish with that engine, I suppose, as far as it uses a lot of really base features. And also, considering that the creator of the game is really enigmatic and elusive, gives us this really wide box of possibilities for who that creator might be. We also know that they were in contact with the persons who just published a remake and kind of a spin-off type thing of Yume Nikki. In press releases, they referred to the creator as they, so we don't know, gender. Or rather, we know that they preferred not to be gendered in the press releases, I suppose. But so thinking of what that does for the game, there's no creator. Or rather, we don't have any context for a creator. So if we have this movie was made by James Cameron, or this was made by Phil Fish or Derek Yu or something, right? We can assume some things, or not even assume some things, but we have a foundation for what we're doing with that game, right? And especially in this game, we don't know the creator. A lot of the character resources and things, we don't necessarily have any foundation to base them off of. If we look at, here's a giant picture of all the characters in the game, right? There is all of them fit in the same world. I feel as, kind of looking at their vibe, if you look at all these, they all work together in tandem, but there's no real, there's nothing we can be this reminds me of that, beforehand, right? It's pretty unique, which is really wild. So basically, you're just kind of thrown into this place where you don't really have any foundation. And also thinking in terms of, anonymity of the creator, it's really interesting in that it kind of lets the video game live by itself without tether to a person. And it's something that you can kind of adopt as your own place, which is really cool. Even though I wouldn't necessarily say that Yume Nikki is an inviting space or a welcoming place, it's a place that you can say this is mine. And you can kind of not take ownership of, but inhabit in a really homely way. Just kind of again, not a welcoming place at all, but it's a place that you can call your own. Yes?
Do we know the creator made any other games after Unity or before it?
We know that in the spin-off and re-release, they were listed as being in contact with the team that made those games. But it was also noted that in those games, what was happening might not necessarily reflect what the creator of the game wanted. Other than that, we don't know anything, as far as I know of.
So the creator don't even have a name or a company name?
It's Kikiyama, but it's on their website, it's, listed as that, but other than that, no. Yeah, so, and again, kind of taking ownership, it's true anonymity, right? And there's a lot of persons that try and deal with anonymity as far as that gives you a lot of cool tools at your disposal. By the way, guys, if you have any questions or comments while I'm speaking, please raise your hand. As far as don't worry about interrupting me, I guess. But yeah, so as far as anonymity and what that does for the game, there's a lot of artists that have tried to be anonymous. as far as kind of separating their work from the artist, right? Because the person who made the work is a factor in that work and how you interact and approach with that work, right? But with this game in particular, we don't really have any foundation to base off of, or we do, but it's this really like, ambiguous, mysterious person, or Kikiyama.
Do they have like interviews with press?
I believe there's,
their background stories?
yeah, we know nothing about them. I could be wrong about this. I think there might be 1 or 2 interviews, but it's nothing like super, super revealing. It's just, kind of like small thoughts. If there's a few websites that I was going to put in the Facebook group after, as far as like, links to other things if you guys wanted to check some more out. But yeah. Thinking of the creator as a variable, and then also as far as like the things made in the game, right? So like all of these, I think that if you were just given all these by themselves, or in context of this, I think you can all tell they all have a similar vibe, right? So it's like, okay, like this is the person who made this game. Here's all the locations, right? They all fit together, but and they're all very specific of the creator, but so we know that they work together, but other than that, they're kind of like by themselves. Like we don't have any foundation or any tether to that, which I think is really important. And I also think that you see that in terms of like, there's so many fan games of this, and it's like a really thriving community, and a really particular community as far as the people that it attracts. Like you have like Flow, Yume, Tuki, stuff like that. Yes?
So like, as an object, it sits in this really interesting place between the way a lot of people make games and the way most people who play games want to consume games.
Sure.
And how they're completely different in some cases, because it's this thing that appears out of nowhere, made by no one. It's super personal. Clearly, whoever made it is really into hands. But it doesn't really have a cult of personality around it at all. It's mysterious. It doesn't mean anything and whatever. But also, there's a wiki about it.
Yeah.
Things that don't mean anything don't get wikis. Things
Yeah.
that don't have a purpose don't get
Yeah.
wikis. So like, there's either a search for a purpose, where
Yeah, yeah.
which I don't think would be that, or like there's an attempt to shrug off what it might mean. But that's not how a
Yeah.
player is supposed to act. A player
Yeah.
is supposed to like listen attentively to what the game's saying. So
Yeah.
like, it sits directly in the middle, and like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like you can see the influence of that attempt to like just put a game out there. Like, sorry, did I?
No, that was
Okay.
all me.
Like Toby Fox, who made Undertale,
Mhm.
did interviews, did a podcast interview one time, and like used a text to speech thing. 'Cause
Yeah.
I didn't want their voice out there. So like that has influence, and then obviously anything popular gets a wiki and gets fan sequels and whatever.
Mhm.
So it's just like it's interesting to me how it's like it's a 5 on the number line. Like
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
like, right in the middle of all that stuff.
I think it's really interesting that you mention as far as like meaning of the things in the game, and also so talking about how there's no creator, but what's really cool is that even though we don't know anything about the creator and like cult of personality, a cult of personality has been created for this person that nobody knows anything about, which is really fun.
Created the personality.
Yeah. And then also in terms of, and this is kind of something else that I wanted to get to, without a creator and without any strong context that this game is built on, we can kind of view everything here as iconography almost, in that it functions as things that we can latch onto, and it functions as things that we can latch onto and kind of like create our own world in this world. So it's rather than, a narrative, it's a world, but we can also use it as a tool. And I think that's the way that a lot of persons have used it, especially in terms of fan games, as far as like, all of these characters for the most part are unnamed. All of them have names based on the fan community. And it's this very like, alive video game in that meaning has been, it's a system that's been created by the persons that have played it, which is really cool. And, kind of like, for example, if you're playing this game without really interacting with the community, right? All of these places you can just kind of like attach things to, as far as there's music, there's place, and there's characters. But other than that, that's it, right? And the characters, function, I'd say, more as like background foundation. Like, you press a button and sometimes they make a noise, but other than that, that's pretty much it. So, you know, you can be like, oh, okay, like, you know, close your eyes and it's like, oh, okay, like Barrack Settlement, like, oh, okay, Sky Garden, the Wilderness. Like, it's places that you can choose to be yours and then attach certain meaning to those places.
How do you think like this game make it like successful for players to project their own identities onto the little girl?
Yeah, definitely. I would totally agree with that. Also, something that I think you see, the creator of Undertale, Toby Fox, drew a lot of inspiration from this game. Like, one thing that I'll just bring up really quickly.
That was a question.
Oh, sorry. I totally agree. Yeah, that's something that you see a lot as far as like a lot of the image boards and like fan communities for this game are, you know, kind of on what Blake mentioned earlier. Like, a lot of people are kind of shut-ins and draw inspiration, or maybe not inspiration, but solidarity with the main character, and kind of looking at that.
How do they interact in the forum? Like,
It's just a
community.
yeah. It's actually really. It's not necessarily inherently tied to the game. It's kind of like a Facebook group of people that you're just friends with. It's like a common, like, oh, okay, like, we all like Yume, Nikki, like, we all kind of relate to this person. Like, there's different boards. There's like image boards. There's like just general questions. Like, you know, they share writing, stuff like that.
Do they talk about like certain characters in the?
Yeah, definitely. There's like fan theory, things like that. Yes.
Like, I checked around a couple of image boards. Like, I know there's one called like Uboa-chan.
Yeah.
Based off of, like, that weird face that's like the fattest one
Yeah.
that have right now. But it's like just seeing like that board and like seeing like the board that they have open there, stuff like Meet General Dreams and stuff like that. It's
Mhm.
like, it's sort of like, even though it isn't strictly talking about Yume and Nikki, it's like the people who are attracted to like the game and who want to like find a community for that. It's like not necessarily needs and shut-ins specifically, but it's like that does come up in the community.
Yeah.
There's a game where it's like a lot of people can see that like, okay, there's this character who's a hikikomori,
Mhm.
so it's like other people who are also hikikomori might hear about the game, so
Yeah.
it's something to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. Blake, do you
Oh yeah, you're talking about characters and how the characters are more like objects,
Mhm.
and I feel that also many of the characters in the games have different interactions.
Mhm.
Like there's a kind of like witch-nosed bug-eyed person that will run around, and if you run into them, they'll like sometimes kind of chase
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
They'll sometimes kind of chase you around and teleport you into an area which you can only get out of by waking up.
Yeah.
So whenever I see that character, I'm always like super like fucking freaked out by them.
Yeah.
I like don't want to touch them because they're an enemy. They're also I would also say that some of the other just by like the simple ways that they use RPG Maker 2003 and like the small like kind of drag and drop almost systems
Mhm.
that you can interact with, and that tool they've actually I feel like have like a lot of like expressivity.
Yeah, definitely.
In that, like some characters won't move, right? And for most of the game, you won't even see any characters except for maybe those like witch-eyed people or
Mhm.
whatever. But then, like when you go into what is it, the neon world, and you see all like the kind of like
Yeah.
dancing around neon characters that are like jiggling around,
Yeah.
really animated, and then when you touch them, they're like not enemies. They like make like a little goofy noise. So like, I think it's interesting how they create characters.
Yeah.
While using such limited, so many limited tools.
Yeah.
And even I would almost say that the game is full of characters because a lot of stuff just has like faces on it, right?
Yeah.
And like almost like the world in some aspects becomes like a character. Like some of them feel pretty hostile, and like especially I forgot what the fans called the blonde-haired girl. That turns
yeah.
into that face. But like, you know, the fact that she's just like, you walk into a room and you really can't interact with her in this usual setting is very, very particular.
Yeah, definitely. I think that those are all really good points as far as character. I think what's really interesting to me, and you know, kind of viewing this as a dreamlike setting, is how there are characters created, but they aren't. They only function in relation to you as far as like they require your interaction to make sounds. Like everything kind of is reliant and tethered to you, which I think is really interesting in this game, but also very like evocative of like a dream, right? Yeah. So also just a quick video that might be important to play. So this is the Eboa event. There's a lot of events in Yume Nikki, and it shows. So this is the blonde girl that was mentioned, and a few things that I want to talk about here. So beforehand, you're in the pink world, right? Oh, I'll let it. Oh, I forgot. Okay. My bad. So you're in this world, right? You have to spawn around. This is the bedroom of that girl, Blake was just mentioning. And what happens is you turn on and off the lights for a chance for the event to happen, right? Every time you enter and exit every time you enter a room, there's a 1 in 64 chance that the event will have the possibility to spawn, which is they spent a lot of time trying to get that to...
Right there. No, here.
Yeah, here. Okay.
Here you go.
Yeah, so this happens a few times. Yeah, and then that happens. So just taking a quick look at like what's happening, right? The things that here's all of these items, right? Just very like unassuming furniture items. And then when the Eboa event happens, they grow like here's eyes, faces, Eboa eyes on this carpet. By the way, the only way to get out of this room is you interact with the character. So it's just uncomfortable. Also kind of important to mention is this character, a lot of people give credit to why this game's so popular as far as like a symbol and a focal point of the game that's like really easy to react to. Like there's a lot of like Let's Plays on YouTube where it's like PewDiePie like screaming and stuff like that. It kind of like that instant. This is the place it takes to you immediately after if you interact with Eboa. And the only way to get out of here, I believe, is to respawn. I don't think that you can exit. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there's Eboa. Yeah, that's kind of it. Yeah. So, also something that I think is really interesting to mention in the room as far as like how this game negotiates space. So, here you have like the place you were just in before you enter the room, right? And then here you have the room, but the place you see outside is not that space at all. You were just in like this really like pink area, and then the outside's like really lush and green with some stars. And this place is really, I mean, I guess if somebody wanted to make like an igloo in the middle of nowhere that looks like a really like normal teenage girl's room, like you could do that, but like I don't think that happens, right? So just how Yume Nikki negotiates space in terms of like, again, nonsense in a term of like I don't know what's happening. Not necessarily. I don't know what's happening, but more in the sense of this is not usual, and I don't have anything to tether this to, which is really interesting. Also, kind of going on themes of like isolation and loneliness. You see this with a lot of characters, but this character in particular was like really not interested in talking with you. Like her eyes are to the right, and she just like does what like wants nothing to do with you, which is kind of fun. What else was I going to mention? Oh, yeah. Okay, so going off of that, thinking of events in the game, right? So you just saw this, like, it took the guy, like, 8 minutes to activate this event, and it's a 1 in 64 chance that happens every time you enter the room, right? And this is something that happens a lot in the game. There's, a lot of things that have, 1 in 64 or like 1 in 2000 or 1 in 20 chances of happening in the game based on it's usually when you enter the room that the chance is decided or when you spawn. Just 2 examples I can think of are when every time that you spawn, it's decided whether there's a door that will or will not be there in the number world, right? I think it's like a 1 in 8 or something. But then versus this, where it's decided every time you enter the door, right? So it's more easily manipulable. And
I'm really curious, like, how do players learn at the first time this is by chance, instead of like,
yeah. That's a really good question. I know a lot of people. It's really hard to finish this game without a guide. If I'm being honest, I've never played it without a guide. Like, my first experience was, like, I don't know what the hell's going on, and then trying to, like, figure out what's going on. I would imagine that it's a lot of, like, this is just a guess, but I'd imagine that somebody posted on the forum, like, wow, like, this was really scary, and then a lot of people being like, what are you talking about? And then a lot of other people going back and, trying to figure that out. Which kind of leads really well into what I was mentioning as far as, like, thinking of chance in this game, right? Like, there's a lot of events that you won't experience yourself, but you know of. Like, I've never actually experienced this myself. I've never, like, gone in, spent, like, 8 minutes, like, clicking and unclicking the light, and waited for Uboa to spawn. But I know that it happened, right? It's just I haven't interacted with it, with that particularly. Which is really interesting in that it kind of reminds me of... there's, like, this common, I guess, nostalgia that a lot of people is mentioned a lot, where you have, like, when you're in elementary school and you're on a playground, and then somebody will mention, like, oh, like, if you press up for, like, 20 minutes and then, like, go past a volcano, like, a rainbow will spawn, and, like, you'll beat the game, like, in a weird way, right? Where it doesn't actually happen, like, not at all, but just, like, really weird, like, rumors and, like, things that happen that are just really wild, like Easter eggs almost. And you can't really do that anymore because, like, internet forums and guides and stuff like that, right? Like, you might hear that on a playground and you'd be like, oh, that's kind of weird, and then you look it up on Google in, like, 20 seconds and be like, oh, like, that's bullshit. Like, that doesn't happen, right? But it's really interesting as far as, like, we can't do that anymore, but in games like this, or in this particular instant with events and chance in this game, right? Something similar is that even though you haven't experienced something yourself, you've seen other people experiencing it, and you know that it happens, right? Which I think is really interesting, but I'm not... I guess I wanted to ask if you guys have any thoughts on that in particular. I think that it's, something really interesting about that is, again, like, one of the most particular things about video game as a medium is its interactivity, right? Like, you're deciding that all these things happen versus just watching them happen. Whereas, like, right now, like, this is functioning more as a film, right? Like, we're watching this go on. And yeah, I think that's really special. Do you guys have any thoughts on that in particular, I guess?
I have a question just on, like, the way this room is laid out.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other rooms that are laid out in a similar way where it's...
Oh, as far as, like, the spatial organization?
You have, like, kind of this... So what kind of is jarring for me with this is that you have, like, this sort of one-point perspective for the walls, but the furniture, specifically the desk, doesn't follow that. Like,
Okay.
Are there other rooms that are sort of a pseudo 3D with one-point perspective with
Yeah.
furniture? Besides, like, your main house?
That's a good question. I know the main house, there's other rooms that deviate in perspective. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any room that would have this perspective in particular, other than there's an igloo room, but there's no real, like, furniture in that room.
Okay.
But there's a few other rooms that I wanted to bring up where, like, one of the rooms in the mall has, like... The mall is probably one of my favorite areas in the game, by the way, but...
Oh, yeah, so, like...
Oh, yeah, this is the same. Okay.
Like, your bedroom doesn't even look like that.
Yeah.
Your bedroom's, like, more just chopped down.
Yeah. Yeah, the mall's, like, real wild. It's also, like, this place. I'm gonna finish the other thing really quickly, but then we'll move on to that because that's really exciting. So just thinking about events, it creates this weird thing, or this weird sensation where you know that something happens here, but you haven't experienced it yourself. and also thinking of that in terms of like a community with like, you know, people working together to figure that out. And also a particular moment in time, like we can't experience this now because there's stuff on the internet that tells us what's happening and what's going on, right? But there was a time when this game was first being, you know, discovered and written about, I suppose, where you were still like participating in that, which I think is really worth mentioning. Also, a really easy parallel is like, it's a really silly parallel, but like, I don't know, you guys know Hearthstone? It's like a card game, right? Whenever a new expansion comes out, everybody for the first month is trying to figure out like what's good and what's not good. And that's a really interesting time to be playing versus immediately after where everything's like very definite, like this is the most effective way to win. But that month period is a really interesting and also a very, it's a really particular time to be involved in that it's not going to happen again, which I think is worth mentioning. You, and then you.
Yeah, I feel like games like this, especially when they first come out, it's like a lot of people just come together because they're trying to find something to like how it makes sense. It's like something like this you're presented as like super cryptic, and of course it's like an independent game, so there's no online guide. It's probably isn't getting a bunch of media attention, and so there's this community of like say 1,000 people, and of course it grows as time goes on. But it's like when there's like random chance events and all these things, people are trying to put something together, find some meaning, see if there's like something that connects everything, and it's like, it's just a wonderful time to be a part of the game. It's fresh and new.
Definitely.
I was just gonna say, so we did a Doki Literature Club a couple of times ago. And that does this interesting thing where it gives you a warning up front, very kindly, that like awful stuff's gonna happen in the game. Children shouldn't play, whatever. And then nothing awful happens for a really long time. So you have this constant sense that the other shoe could drop at any moment, even though nothing outwardly scary is happening in the game. You're constantly on edge. So I feel like once you know that kind of chance stuff happens in Yume Nikki, it's kind of a similar feeling. Even if nothing random is in fact happening, you have this constant sense of like, oh, there could be like 9 layers deep in this room that I'm not seeing, and it just like it gives you this weird, dreamy, paranoid kind of feeling that I think like enriches the game a lot. That for me anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really valid thought. Also, in terms of like, there's some stuff that's just like really out there. Like, there's this one thing that happens once every 2,000 times where actually I think I have it over here. Oh wait, no, it's events. Oh, I guess I didn't bring it up. There's this one thing that happens where it's like if you sit there for half an hour, roughly on average, like a giant like monster will float by and like some weird music will happen, which is pretty well. So just stuff like that, you know, I think is really fun. It's 1 in 2,000 every 30 seconds, I believe, or every like 5 seconds, something like that. I
guess I wanted to say like there's something about like fan culture and nerd culture that's kind of like this almost like defensive quality against the unknown or something.
Oh,
it seems
that's
like
interesting.
This obsession to like categorize things and like retain all this knowledge about like really specifics about a certain subject, where it almost like loses its spontaneity or something. And
okay.
Like I couldn't really imagine people making a Wikipedia for like a surrealist novel or something like that. Like they would.
Okay.
You kind of read it and experience it, and it has this like really like subjective kind of experience.
Okay.
And then like when you play a game like this and people categorize everything like that, it almost seems like a defense against that kind of like unknown. Does that make sense?
No, definitely. I'm gonna take 2 other questions and then can I come right back to that?
Sure.
But definitely yes, I'm really interested in that.
I find it really interesting because, like, again, going back to the surreal nature of the whole thing, and now I'm thinking about it. By the way, I know nothing about this game. This is my first exposure.
Oh, yeah, sure. Exciting.
Just kind of piecing things together. But what I find really interesting about this whole, like, fandom coming together and the social aspect of it, it's, like, generally dreams, whether they're pleasant or nightmares, like, they're very, like, intensely personal experiences.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so I'm thinking about what you just showed us, which was horrifying. But, like... I'm just imagining the player who, like, back when this was, like, not a known thing, whoever stumbled upon that.
Yeah.
And it's, like, kind of like, if you have a dream, let's say, like, you're back in, like, high school or elementary school, and you have, like, this really intense, vivid nightmare, there's, like, no way to possibly share that with, like, the people that you're interacting with on the daily, and, like, you know, have them, like, experience that with you, whereas this kind of allows you to have a really intense, surreal experience.
Yeah.
And share it with other people in a weird way.
No.
Since everyone's grasping at straws to find meaning, and so when you look at the unknown, you tend to like drive meaning through projecting your unconsciousness. So
Sure.
all of those layers, I think, really it's really fascinating what's going on with that.
Yeah, I think that's also really cool to think of in terms of like, you know, video game creator as auteur, like also thinking of like Ico and like Shadows of the Colossus and kind of like sharing not necessarily your vision, but just you like as a person, and just kind of like making that into like this distilled object that you can share with others is really valuable.
So there seems to be, in the talk of instances and chances, really specific numbers being discussed.
Yeah.
How are people finding those numbers? I mean, like it seems like some of these numbers are like shared and repeated. Like I've heard the 1 out of 64 before. Is that something that, like, I can't believe that that's just from sheer counting?
Yeah.
Are they like looking at the code or something?
I would imagine so. I know the source code is available. Honestly, I just found these, like all the events are just, you know, on the Wikipedia page, and they have the numbers, but I know that like you can download it in RPG Maker 2003, like with the original, you know, so all the information's available for like people to kind of spelunk and do what they will. So going back to thinking of it in terms of like surrealism and like defense as fan culture, right? Just a really quick thing I want to mention. I'm not too intimately knowledgeable about fan games of Yume Nikki. Really worth looking into though if you're interested. It's a really rich culture. There's like I have this thing on my laptop where I wanted to like mention a few, so I was gonna, you know, like watch a few stuff last night as far as like you know, speed runs of a few games, but I looked up, somebody made a list of like all the fan games for Yume Nikki, and I think there's like 40 or not 40. There's 17 pages of 4x4, 17, 16, at least over 200 fan games, which is a lot. It's also really interesting thinking of, like, Yume Nikki's a really niche game, but how big of an impact it's had. You know, mentioning, like, Undertale earlier and also mentioning Lisa, right? Like, Undertale's so much inspiration for Yume Nikki. There's one area, just a really easy example.
How to get the fat.
So, the docks in Undertale, right? I don't know how many of you guys have played this game, but there's an area where you fight Fish Lady. Undyne, thank you. And you're kind of exploring that, but also the areas directly next to it with the mushrooms and stuff, right? Here's the docks. Here's the docks in Yume Nikki. Literally the same thing. You know, even the lampposts are so similar. I was, you know, trying to figure that out beforehand, like really similar. Another thing that's really, I think it's okay if I spoil the ending of Undertale, right? That's fine. So there's one event, there's one event that happens, where it's just a giant face, right? I cannot believe that Toby Fox was not thinking about this when he made the ending of Undertale. As far as like it's just jittering, it's the same vibe. You know, really interesting. Also, Lisa. I don't want to guarantee this, so you know, don't take my word on this. But I remember reading in a few places that Lisa started off as a fan remake of Yume Nikki, which is kind of interesting to think of. It's also really interesting to think of, you know, like video game creator as auteur, right? And you know, generally a lot of things that have roots in that discussion are of, you know, people coming like as outsiders, right, and bringing their influence to video games. You know, one of the things, like, I've been looking at curation a lot recently, and a lot of the most famous curators like ever, and you know, the most innovative, come from like widely disparate fields. Like, this guy's been like an architect for 50 years, or this guy's been in finance, right? And you know, in video games we see like Lisa was made by like a professional karate guy, right? Like, that's all that he does, and he's like, I want to make a video game now, and you know, he made Lisa, which was amazing. One of the things I also wanted to bring up, you know, talking about surrealism, Heaven and Earth Magic, which is filmed by Harry Smith, where you have a lot of the same things as far as I think it's a really valuable. comparison. Really valuable comparison. In terms of, kind of thinking about like lack of context, right? And so basically in this film, you have no idea what's going on. There's no background. There's character images, but you don't know where those are from, and still nobody knows where there's from. We know basically there's a lot of like magazine cutouts and stuff like that, but one of the things that makes it so interesting is there's absolutely no context. And it's basically like really, really, really easy comparison to Yume Nikki, as far as, kind of what's going on and like, I don't know what's going on and stuff like that. And also just the general vibe, I think, is really potent. Okay, so I'll probably talk about a few more things and then finish off with like questions if there was anything that we didn't cover that we want to cover as a group, things that we're interested in looking at together. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about this game, and maybe not theorized as much as, I think it could be, is the jellyfish character. And also, so, there's a lot of time spent like thinking about this game, right? Oh wow, the door just opened by itself. It's pretty cool. So,
One in 2000
yeah. But, so jellyfish is a character in Yume Nikki. It happens. It's located in one of these roads that you're just walking down, which also has a different perspective. Generally, you jump between like the rooms that I showed prior, like in the mall, top down, or not top down, but like you're exploring the map, and then like these roads where it's just you're continuously walking. And there's a jellyfish. It's one of the only characters that basically doesn't really react to much. If I remember correctly, it doesn't react. Yeah, so Uboa and the Toreningen, which is like the persons with the big nose that Blake mentioned earlier that like try and chase you, they're immune to the knife effect. You can interact with it and it'll make a bell noise. That's it, right? But what's really interesting is at the end of this game, basically what happens is you collect all 24 effects, you place them in the room, and then there's a so you wake up, there's a staircase at the end of your balcony, and then you presumably die. You walk up the staircase, and I can show here actually. Yeah, okay. So, you place all these over here. Oh, this guy kind of, okay. So you place all the effects there, right? And then this staircase spawns. And then you... Oh, wow, he's real dramatic. Yeah, so you do that. It doesn't show your body, which I think is worth noting, but it does give you this blood splat, which is, it's been used a few times in the game. Like, it's the same blood splat used in a few different places. But, it gives you the jellyfish, right? And also kind of fun, if you press the 1 key, this one will make a noise, and if you press the 3 key, this one will make a noise. So you can interact with them in the endgame screen. But I think it's really interesting that the creator chose, the jellyfish. Honestly, I'm not super convinced that it's a jellyfish. That's a general, thing. It kind of looks like one, but I don't think that it could be a jellyfish. I don't think that it has to be jellyfish though. But it's only seen one other time. It makes a bell noise. But yeah, other than that, I think it's really interesting as far as an inclusion in the endgame screen immediately after. Probably died. I mean, again, your body's not shown. There's a blood splat. I think it's also really interesting that your body's not shown. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Okay.
Some people. Well, I think there's like a large fan theory that. Well, there kind of like several, right?
Yeah.
About like, oh, what does the game mean? Right?
Yeah.
And I know one of the fan theories is like, oh, they're like some shut-in, right? Like they're just obsessed with like video games or whatever, because that's like really the only other thing you can interact with.
Yeah.
And then like the other theory is like that the game is about like like a rape survivor,
Mm-hmm.
and then that has to do with that because
Oh, like phallic.
the only way to get there's like one item that's like kind of in sequence with the rest of them that you have to get, and it's like this like man in this like on Mars, and then after you like basically you can get every egg or item or whatever you want to call it before you basically go to the spaceship and you interact with this guy, and it's like a real fucking bizarre interaction, right? And it's also interesting that you're collecting like eggs, and then that there's like this blood splatter, and some people like attribute that to be like menstruation or some other thing. I mean, these are just the fan theories. It's not like it's like a literal. I mean, I think also it doesn't matter if you killed yourself or not. None of this is like literal.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that like those are themes that people think about in regards to this game.
I think one of the things I was most interested in with the jellyfish is that it's also one of the only characters that you can see when you aren't sleeping. As far as the only areas that are accessible to you are your bedroom and the balcony when you're awake, but we see the jellyfish being in both the dream and in the not dream, which is really worthwhile.
I'm not convinced that it's not the dream because it's black. Why would the dog be black?
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of theories about how maybe she didn't die at the end because why are monsters from her dream showing up in what should be reality, or maybe she's sleeping. This is the metaphor for sleeping forever or something like that, or she just dreamed she died. Yeah,
that's another thing I think is really like I see a lot of things as far as there's a lot of events in the game that you can only get to by like sleeping in beds, right? There's one screen where like there's 27 beds or something, like there's a lot of beds, and to get to one area you have to sleep in one that's randomly chosen, and then the other are occupied, and then to get in another place, and a lot of persons interpret that as like dream within a dream within a dream. I think it's definitely worthwhile thinking of that. I don't necessarily think that's what I would agree with as far as an interpretation, but I think that's a really interesting motif. I'm also just going to show really quick the spaceship to Mars, because I think, Mars is a really interesting area. But also, I think the spaceship's probably one of my favorite places in the game. Yeah, it's real weird. Oh, that's the bed in the spaceship. You can just kind of hang out there. And then there's there's this alarm, and then there's this piano guy who's he moves faster when the alarm's happening, which I think is really fun. That's another thing that's kind of interesting as far as like, or I'll mention that in a little bit. But so spaceship, alarm, guy freaking out. You can play the piano too, by the way. Each position has a different note, and then if you have the knife, and then the spaceship crashes, and you're in Mars. The graphics, AAA. I saw that, or I heard that these were real pictures from Mars. But no, not actually. And then you can make yourself small, and then you come down here. I'm not particularly. I haven't spent a lot of time looking at like forums for fan theories, but I do know that a lot of people spend a lot of time theorizing about this character. Yeah, he's so sad. You hang out over here. You can stab him and he'll change colors. But if you stab him again, he'll change back to the original colors, which I think is kind of... Oh, I guess, yeah. And his foot bleeds a little bit. Foot. But yeah. So there's that one. Also going back to kind of looking at vibe a little bit. Also, really quickly before I forget, one of the things on surrealism earlier, one of the things I was thinking of a lot while playing this game is Ulysses, which, not really surrealism, but taking something so and trying to make sense of it, and in kind of like a defensive manner, as far as like trying to make sense of nonsense.
The defensiveness is like,
Bless you.
because you're not making sense of nonsense. You're coming up with an answer for a thing that has a multitude of answers. Like,
Yeah,
people are,
of course.
I think, like instinctively afraid of something that's resonant but unclear. Like they recognize something in themselves,
that's
but
interesting.
they can't readily put words to it. So they're like, well, I need to find out what the answer is. We need to like debate it on the wiki until we know that thing's a jellyfish.
It's really interesting.
The
Yeah.
jellyfish, even to people who don't think it's a jellyfish, we're gonna call it that.
Yeah.
Because that's how you can Google it.
That's really interesting. I wonder if there's any like James Joyce fan games. But anyways, so
It's funny that you're talking about like media in which people really like fan out. And the immediate thing I thought of was In the Airplane Over the Sea by
yeah.
Hotel. And that's like one of the biggest like argumentative like kind of surrealist works of like the 90s. But there was like an RPG Maker game made on that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so.
It's really bad.
What was what's it called?
I don't know. If you search
Jeff Mangum's something or other, yeah. It's bad in kind of an interesting way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to Yume Nikki and vibe of Yume Nikki, another place that I think is really interesting and as a vibe, but also to think of is the mall. So this guy's gonna get to the mall. First, you go through the graffiti world, which is real wild. Again, like black background, figures moving in that background. Also,
Is that an avocado?
if you want it to be, sure. I don't know what avocados you're looking at, but yeah.
It's kind of like a manipulated avocado.
Yeah. One of the things also, I'm not going to talk too long on it, but one of the things that I think is really interesting as far as like perfect multiplicity, right? That kind of spans to video games as a medium, but all of these objects make the same noise if you step on them, right? Like these are two different objects and they are perfectly the same as far as it's the same texture sprite, and they make the perfectly same sound as far as like a perfect a perfect a perfect like it's the same thing but made twice, like multiplicity, which I think is really interesting to think of as far as like it's a different object that's the same. But so you go through here to get to the mall. It's kind of fun. There's like you also get the bike here, and I'm gonna let the player walk to the mall because it's the entrance is kind of fun. Yeah, so there's the entrance. You can get to the mall another way, but you get to the mall one of two ways. This is one of them. This is the roof of the mall, which is really fun. Like, yeah, it's really good. We're gonna come back to this, but before we talk about that, I want to talk about the mall a little bit. So each of these characters make the same noise. I think there's a few different sprites, and then the mall is just the walls based on like these textures, but other than that it's like pitch black, and there's some stores that you can go in, which are terrifying. Also worth noting is it plays the same music from the title screen but slowed down. I don't really have any immediate thoughts on that, but definitely something worth thinking of. This guy is really disheartening when you interact with him. He just kind of spells out.
Disheartening.
Yeah. I think that's a heartbeat. So that's one of the stores. Yeah, stores, quote unquote.
Wait,
what's up?
Are malls like this in Japan? So the reason I'm asking that.
Yeah.
Does anyone know? Are malls like this in Japan?
Explain what you mean by like this.
Like,
do they
okay,
serve you blood?
So the two references I really have to Japanese malls are like, oh, this is called the mall, right? And then in Shin Megami Tensei, the malls are like the fucking same. And I don't know if this game is like riffing off of Shin Megami Tensei or like, I know a lot of the people that played this also played like Shin Megami Tensei games.
Which
Who are
Huh.
fans of this.
That's interesting.
It's just like any of like the first one, like Shin Megami Tensei. Or, like,
Well, I don't.
Yeah, like, is all for any reason except that people went digging in the RPG Maker files and decided it was called that? Like,
Well-
the game called
Well,
that?
are malls underground?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
sorry,
sure.
Okay, yeah, so you know what I.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for
Yeah.
answering the question.
So yes, walls are sometimes underground labyrinths. I mean, like here too.
Yeah.
In the Midwest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Also, I think interesting comparison as far as like what malls are in video games, as far as not necessarily technical limitation, but like genre limitation, like Shin Megami Tensei, but also if you're looking at like Persona 3, where there's malls, but they're like vastly different based on the purpose they serve in that game. But yeah.
It's also like that mall near Rockefeller Center, the one that's like underground.
Oh yeah.
That's sort of like also.
Yeah, I visited Singapore, and they have like underground malls, right? They have like 7-story like underground malls. It's wild. Yeah. It's there's like.
Once you're out of space, man, what are you gonna do?
No. Yeah, you like get off the train and then stuff goes on.
Bomb shelters?
Honestly, probably.
Oh, so this is the second store.
It looks like
Also, this is off the top of my head, this is the only other dialogue option, like immediate dialogue option other than sound that you have with any other character that I can think of in the game. And it changes your menu color.
to red.
Yeah, I think there's a few other options.
Purple.
Pink.
Is it
Yeah.
random?
Probably.
Because it doesn't look like it cycles.
It's random and then there's a rare color, but I don't know what it was. Again with the chances thing.
Always with the chances.
And then if you sit here for a while, something happens that lets you go into that room and get the flute. Yeah. So interesting as a vibe as far as, and kind of where I'm interested in talking about is if you look at, so I mean there's a lot of variables in this room, right? But this room has a vibe. Like there's a character here, there's the flute, you're playing the flute, there's your character, there's the music, there's the textures and the image as a whole, but with all of that, like there is one vibe that comes from that, right? And that vibe is different than here, is different than here, is different than here, right? But Yume Nikki as a whole has this very, very like strong, visceral vibe. And one thing that I, was thinking of a lot in terms of that is if you scroll through all the locations, right? And all the character files, like if you're just looking at screenshots of all of these, right? They have a pretty their color palette like works together. And if you just look at all these images, it evokes like as a whole like a very strong, and I don't want to say the same feeling, but it works together as a whole to kind of like bring you this one, like you're in a place and this place has a very strong, defined, special vibe. I also think that Yume Nikki, and thinking in terms of like other persons I get this from, like Francis Bacon, the painter, and like Yves Klein, thinking about like place. But and what I think is really interesting about that is, really quickly, sorry to interrupt myself, I guess, but there's one thing I wanted to mention about the mall that I didn't get to go back to. There's only 2 places where you see the outside world as far as like setting context that isn't black space in Yume Nikki. It's the mall. You have like here, right? Yeah, Roof of the Mall is the best. You can get like a witch effect, and then you like fly around. But you see the outside world here, and you also see it in. There's a forest with 3 persons watching like over a cliff, and then you see the outside world. But other than that, that's it. Which I think is a really interesting link between those 2 spaces. But going back to general vibe, so I think that, and I guess this is why I was thinking of the mall so much, is in terms of Yume Nikki, a game that's really, really strong and visceral, but also very mysterious in terms of like, you know, there's no developer, and also a lot of the things in this game are without context, right? One of the things that you can use as context in this game is like time. So like Brackage's theory with regards to like I was here, now I'm here, but also the time in that it's created, right? Like we know that this game, you know, was updated, but late or early 21st century, right? And thinking of how things that are made in the time in which things are made affecting the things that are made, right? Like zeitgeist. And what does the time that we are living in say in reflected in this, which I think is really interesting. As far as like general vibes, like I get really similar feelings from, you know, like Silent Hill 2. Not the same, but in the same like ballpark of feeling, right? You know, it's just this like, not hopelessness, but like very dense and you know, almost futility, but also in terms of you know, multiplicity, thinking of like the internet and consumerism, and you know, like this is a medium that wasn't available, you know, 100 years ago, right? So I think that's really interesting to think of in terms of like how this is something that could only be made now. Do you guys have any thoughts on that with regards to like vibe and thinking of how it kind of reflects our time, I suppose?
Well, loneliness is one of them. Like pure isolationism. Like it's kind of funny because Japan has got to be I just find Japan kind of to be a paradox with social communication. Like it is the most crowded country on the planet, yet never has a country been so isolated or had so many people claiming to be lonely and people committing suicide because of it. And so you wander into these massive worlds with houses, with forests, in malls, completely empty. And that's what I feel like a lot of socially withdrawn people in Japan feel. They wander into these massive streets filled to the brim with people, but not a single person to communicate with or have a social communication with. As one Egyptian proverb goes, water everywhere, but not one drop to drink.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking of while playing this game is actually, there's a poem by Percy Shelley called Ozymandias. Maybe I'll mention that later.
I don't know how often you run into like other humanoid characters in the game, but that actually just got me thinking about the Yume event again.
Yeah.
How in one particular reading of it, you could imagine it's the idea of trying to talk to someone again and again and again until either like the person rejects you or you have a psychotic break because like of frustration or something like that, and then you end up like trapped in that chaotic sphere.
Definitely.
I don't know how many moments there are like that in the game, but it seems like generally things don't interact with you, and it's varied. Things that have faces that you can recognize versus things that don't, but have other recognizable things. Like, sorry, like uncanny valley, sort of.
Yeah, definitely. Also, for those of you that don't know, uncanny valley is like when there's something really similar but not exactly the same, and it creates like awkwardness because of that.
Like 32 there.
Pardon?
Like 32 there.
Yeah. So kind of a face, but not really, right? And I think what's really interesting when you make mention to that is as far as like you can interact with these persons and they make sounds, right? But not. I think it's really valuable that they make sounds but not words, And, you know, thinking of that, and also, like, you know, humanoid characters, right? Like, a lot of these are humanoid, but very, very abstracted, and, you know, what does that do for the game as a whole? I mean, definitely, you know, like, an immediate thought is, like, again, like, just a general, like, dreamlike vibe, but, you know, thinking of that.
There's a part in the wilderness where those bird women that we discussed with
Mm-hmm.
the strange noses, they're having a picnic, and
Yeah.
surrounded by cactuses, so you can't get to them to interact with them, but you stand on the outside and you watch them basically have a party without you.
Yeah.
And you can't join.
Oh, there's one of my favorite events in the game is, I could be a little wrong about this, but there's an event where it's, they're having a picnic, and then there's like a boombox, and then it's just like a bunch of music playing, and it's just really out of place, but it's pretty fun. Yeah. What's up?
Oh, I was gonna say in relation to so what I think is pretty interesting about the game is like the variety of art style and how some parts of the game look like, you know, the game was made in like 2003, you know, whenever, and some of the quality of the graphics look like kind of like a professional like game that would have come out on like Game Boy Advance or like Super Nintendo or something, and then like other graphics just look like some kid scribbled in MS Paint or whatever, right? And that girl in that room is the only other character that has like the same like fidelity, I guess, of like art as the main character.
Yeah.
So she's like the only stylistically similar character in the game, which is interesting because there's like such like a draw to that. But what I also think is interesting is like how so much of the art, like especially the stuff that's like the parallax backgrounds that happen that are just like in the floor, a lot of those are actually like almost direct copies of like ancient Peruvian art. When you're talking about place and time, and especially about the mystery of the maker, it seems as though the person who is making this game wants this game to be some sort of, like, it feels related to artifacts. Like when I first played this game, I was like, what's this weird thing? This feels like, you know, it felt like I discovered something strange, right? And then part of what's so fun, and especially in regards to the wikis, it feels like the wikis are just like, you know, like a big textbook about like, I don't know, like it like the I don't know, it like hieroglyphics or something like that. It feels like it's decoding like some secret message or something like that. So there's this fun, it's like part of the fun of the game is just like almost like decoding it.
Yeah, definitely.
Figuring out what it's
I also another thing on that, just like immediate thoughts, is there's this one event that happens where in the numbers room where everything turns into like different symbols. You get transported to the small room, and then there's a bunch of already number symbols in the room, but everything gets turned to like a giant A or like an I, right? And also like common motifs of symbols like I and stuff is really interesting. But definitely discovery. I also think, you know, even though there's no context in this game, like how we're, I mean, there is and there isn't, but how we're interacting with it and discovering it, like, even though this game is really influential and significant, it's still very niche, right? So generally speaking, like when you're playing this game, you're playing it by yourself. Like you can't go, like I couldn't go to, if I went to like a class that I'm in right now and mentioned that I was like playing Call of Duty, like people know what that is. But if I was like, oh, okay, like I'm playing Yume Nikki, like nobody, you know, you're usually interacting with it in solitude, which I think is really interesting, especially as like discovery.
Like on the topic of like having a wiki and people trying to like solve and find everything, when I was going through the wiki for like the Yume Nikki wiki, it kind of felt more like a bunch of like field recordings or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just like logging what they see, and like there isn't like, I mean, there's like traces of a narrative if you want to say about like her being Hikimori or something like that, but it's like, rather than saying, oh, this leads to this or this leads to that, it's more like, here's this location, X can happen here, Y can happen here, and sometimes maybe Z. But it's sort of like, it doesn't have that like feel you'd find in another wiki for like another series. It kind of feels just like a bunch of like individual things. And talking about, oh, it's crazy.
Yeah. I think I totally agree, and it's really fun. Like I remember when I was scrolling through, just like freshening up on some stuff last night. Like sometimes there'll just be like really weird asides in the wiki where it's like, don't do this, and then it's like quotation marks, like lol, this is really funny or something like that, and like it's a really interesting place.
Hunter, I just want to say we're at basically 10 till 10. So
okay.
Do you have like a final summary or conclusion?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, just a quick question open to you and everyone here. Do you think having a wiki is a double-edged thing in that it provides a common language for everything for all the people, but it also on the other side it also in a sense tells you what to think of each thing?
Okay. Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of I spent a really long time thinking about how to achieve anonymity on the internet. I think the only really 100% works 100% of the time answer I found is doing something that nobody cares about, which is kind of fun. But
that can backfire.
Yeah. But I think having a wiki is just something regardless of whether we like it or not, and definitely something that I'm interested in hearing everybody else's thoughts on. Is it's unavoidable, and I think it's not even whether it's a double-edged sword, because that kind of implies that we can choose or not, right? But it's something that we kind of have to work with now, as far as the internet is just such. The internet's just a part of everything, and kind of
cultural byproduct.
Yeah. It's more like a geographical feature of making things now, I would say.
To me, the wiki in this case is just trying to put labels on things that otherwise don't have labels.
Yeah.
The red thing they say is hell, but it could just be red place.
Yeah,
Or
definitely.
white desert could be white canvas with black stuff on it.
Yeah.
And I feel like people operating the wiki would be less interested if you got to the red place and said hell.
Yeah.
Or a tutorial that said, 1 in every 64 times stuff can happen. Try that would make the game less. If the information that they're working really hard to catalog here were in the game, it would lessen the game in some way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that also one thing that I think is important to reiterate is most everything in this game is all fan names. Uboa isn't the name of that. There's no thing in the game that says this is hell, this is white desert, this is witch's island. Also a lot of the names are really weird if you get the chance to look at them. I was reading one and it was this is a combination of or it was the name of the piano guy in space. It's a combination of 10 different names. One of them is Michael Jackson because he walks backwards, and you're this is important. But it's just a really, I think this game is as much a place, but also the persons that adopted the place, as far as this game's context is, and the persons that are interacting with it, and you're kind of in this community by interacting with that community is really interesting. Just a small wrap up, and then going back to things that we're interested in, just so I don't run out of time. Yume Nikki, really, really cool game as far as what it is, but also potentiality of video games as a medium, and also alternate futures, right? Briefly mentioning how narrative film right now is kind of the standard for mainstream Hollywood cinema, and most mainstream cinemas, but it doesn't have to be, as far as that's a system we're operating in, but it's not inherently true. There's other ways of accessing cinema. There's, if you look at Wavelength by Michael Snow, right, and a lot of the stuff that and a lot of the things that oh god, I always forget his name, Andy Warhol. A lot of things that Andy Warhol is doing, it's really silly. He makes films that aren't necessarily meant to be watched, but to just kind of sit there, right, and interact. He has one where it's just a really long time with the Empire State Building, and then you leave and get up and do other things while it's operating there. Wavelength by Michael Snow, really, if you're interested, get a chance. It's just a slow pan on this photo, right? It's 40 minutes, and each time I'm not doing it justice by skipping, but really, really slow pan, right? And just thinking of different things that the medium can be, right? Video games don't have to be narrative. And I think that Yume Nikki does a really good job of, showing example of that, and thinking about what it can be as far as place, right? Also thinking in terms of the general vibe it emits, and the visceralness, and also thinking of how strongly the person who created the game is embodied in the game. and you know, thinking about how that could only be made at the time it was made, as far as like technology and how that technology affects what's being made. You know, image in Yume Nikki, sound in Yume Nikki, how it functions as a place with the medium of technology. You know, the characters and like the reliance of those characters on you. And I just think it's really oh man, I love Yume Nikki, but also it's really cool thinking about how, I mean, really influential, even though it's really niche, but also thinking, I guess, just in terms of like what a video game can be. And I think it does a really good job of, you know, asking some really good questions about that. And also, you know, context as far as like the creator and the community that spawned from that. And the ability to participate in that community is really cool. But yeah, so with all of that and like what we talked about, we have 4 minutes, and I don't really mind going over if you guys have like 1 or 2 minutes and you want to stick around. Is there any like loose ends or any, you know, anything that anybody else was interested in that we didn't get a chance to go over?
I mean, the roof, the witch.
Oh,
effect.
yeah. What about the witch effect?
Well, if you look at, I think it's the witch effect where you can, on the roof, that's the place you see the outdoors, but you can use the witch effect and you can basically fly off of the roof and it's plays some very nice happy music.
Yeah.
And you can't get out of it unless you unequip the effect, and that causes you to plummet, and then you wake up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting as far as, you know, again, like interacting with the room and trying to like figure out like, oh, not that one.
Yeah.
This one. So just, also, you know, kind of going back to it, the cat has chances to like, I think it's a 1 in 64 to spawn somewhere that's not on the roof. But anyway. It's so good. Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts about Yume Nikki is how it has this really aggressive, like oppressive vibe, and then it just kind of like, you know, sometimes surprisingly just gives you something like this, where it's just really refreshing, and like, I don't even know the right word, but one of my favorite parts. But yeah, definitely the witch effect's really fun, and the scene. And then you just kind of like crash, and then the animation's kind of fun when you're just kind of like, yeah. But yeah. Say that again? Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's the Stanford video.
He said foreshadowing. I said that's why I mentioned it, because it's another place where you fall.
Oh, that's interesting.
One of the only places you see outside too. So like that and the balcony.
That's really interesting. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I've never thought about it in that context.
Wait, can you wake up in like any space that you get stuck in, or like?
Yeah.
You're always able to wake up.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can wake up anywhere.
Like so. Okay, cool. So you're never like stuck forever.
Yeah, there's a few places you can only leave by waking up, or by one of the effects you can get is like this giant hand with an eye in it, and then you can like activate that to respawn in the center room instead of waking up. But for the most part, it's pretty navigatable, and then there's a few places where you can't. But yeah, and I think unless anybody else has any other questions, we're at the time limit. So yeah, thank you all for coming out and participating. Really appreciate it.